This video is about the Alcatraz escape, the evidence left behind, and the questions it raises. How did they do it? What clues remain? But did they make it? Or did they die trying? One morning in 1962, during a routine head count on Alcatraz Island, a prison guard was walking cell to cell. Everything seemed normal, until he got to Clarence Anglin's bunk. The prisoner wasn't waking up. The guard tapped him with his nightstick. Nothing. The guard's heart sank. Is he dead? He wondered, as he reached through the bars and poked the head again. It rolled off the pillow with a cold, silent thud. No groan, no blink. This wasn't Clarence Anglin, but a crude dummy of soap, cement, toilet paper, and real hair. Eyes painted on, eyebrows stitched from clippings. Backup wasn't called until the next morning's count. In Frank Morris's cell, the same. An unblinking dummy head. Alarms erupted across the island, but the men had slipped out after 10 p.m. the night before, giving them roughly 8 to 9 hours before the escape was discovered. Two kilometers off San Francisco, Alcatraz is a 22-acre island where geography and engineering combined to contain the federal system's most difficult inmates. Cold water, strong currents, and distance formed natural barriers, reinforced by armed towers, hardened cells, and strict count and movement routines. Before becoming a federal prison in 1934, the island served as lighthouse, coastal fort, and army disciplinary barracks. The conversion reused military structures and created a fenced residential compound for staff, anchored by Building 64 beside the dock. A civilian community lived there. Officers, spouses, and children, about 300 residents at times, kept fully segregated from inmate areas. Notable prisoners included Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, Robert Stroud, Birdman, Alvin Creepy Karpis. Frank Morris. He was smart, too smart. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1926, Morris had an IQ of 133 and a long rap sheet, mostly robberies. He'd already escaped from Louisiana State Penitentiary and Atlanta Federal Penitentiary before being sent to the Rock. Officers said he was shy and quiet, neat, polite. Yet there was something the guards never quite saw, like they were watching the outline of a man, while the real mind slipped past in the shadows. The truth is, he was an escape artist. Some called him Houdini behind bars. John and Clarence Anglin, brothers, bank robbers, born into a farming family on the Georgia-Florida line. They robbed a bank with a toy gun and got 35 years, but they were slippery, caught trying to escape Leavenworth. They were sent to Alcatraz. More importantly, they were expert swimmers. As kids, they'd dive into the icy waters of Lake Michigan for fun, while ice still floated on the surface. And the last inmate, Allen West. Allen West played an important role in planning and preparing the June 1962 Alcatraz escape, but he ultimately failed to get out of his cell that night and was left behind. Regarding his past, he had a record as a repeat offender with numerous arrests and earlier escape attempts, and he'd previously hijacked a prison warden's car at gunpoint during a failed escape from another facility before being transferred to Alcatraz in 1957. They didn't begin with tools. They began with proximity. 4 men in neighboring B-block cells, exchanging glances, testing whispers, and memorizing the rhythm of guards and machines after the 9:30 p.m. lockdown. Morris, known for his intelligence, took the lead in the planning. They were aided by another inmate, Allen West. West had a knack for fixing things around the prison, and when a vacuum cleaner broke down in the cleaning crew, he volunteered to repair it. The machine stayed broken, but its motor quietly disappeared. Spoons vanished from meal trays. Paint cans went missing from the workshop. Raincoats changed hands in trades that nobody bothered to count. At first, The escape seemed almost impossible, but their arsenal was getting bigger and more sophisticated. What began as a lonely tap of metal on stone evolved into a steady, methodical assault on the prison itself. With the spoons, they started carving. Night after night, the men used sharpened spoons to chip away at the crumbling concrete around the air vents in their cells. But the work was brutally exhausting and painfully slow, draining their strength and threatening to expose them before progress was visible. To overcome this, they salvaged a stolen motor from a vacuum cleaner and transformed it into a makeshift drill. Its vibrations tore through the wall with far greater speed, accomplishing in hours what once required days of back-breaking work. To mask the sound, they chose the loudest hours of the prison to work. Morris even played his concertina, blending the mechanical hum of the drill with music and noise from the cell block. Yet this new efficiency brought a dangerous consequence. The growing holes were impossible to hide from a passing guard. A single glance could expose everything. To counter this, they crafted false plates from cement dust, cardboard, and soap, carefully painted with stolen pigments. These covers blended perfectly into the prison walls, creating the illusion of untouched stone. Each night, the panels came off so the work could continue, and each morning they were set back in place, buying the men the time they needed to move forward. But even the illusion of perfect walls would not protect them once they left their cells. If the guards discovered empty bunks during night checks, the entire plan would collapse before the escape could unfold. To outwit this final obstacle, the men sculpted dummy heads out of a mixture of soap, toilet paper, and carefully painted features. What gave them a startling realism, however, was the addition of real human hair. Clarence Anglin, assigned to work in the barber shop, smuggled the hair strand by strand, slipping it into the cuffs of his pants before returning to his cell. With this stolen detail, the dummies looked convincingly alive. In the dim moonlight of the cell block, they passed as sleeping men, fooling the guards during night checks while the real prisoners were already slipping into the shadows of their escape. Behind the cell block, hidden beyond the narrow openings they had carved, the men discovered a utility corridor. In this forgotten space, they built what became their secret workshop. By day, it was silent and deserted. By night, it came alive with the rustle of stolen materials and the quiet determination of men preparing for freedom. Months earlier, Frank Morris had come across the March 1962 issue of Popular Mechanics, featuring a life preserver demonstration that planted a critical idea in his mind. Inspired by its design, he guided the construction of a raft made from multiple raincoats. Assembling the raft required more than ingenuity. It demanded advanced technique. They deconstructed over 50 raincoats that had been surreptitiously stolen or traded from fellow inmates. Rummaging through the prison's cobbling and glove-making shops, they secreted away rubber cement, rich with vulcanizing agents. With heat from the exposed steam pipes and heavy planks as makeshift presses, they vulcanized the seams, sealing the coats into an airtight, watertight life raft. Over time, the fragments transformed into something formidable, a raft large enough to carry all 3 men across San Francisco Bay. Alongside it, they fashioned makeshift paddles carved from tool handles and pilfered lumber, as well as crude but functional life vests sewn and sealed from smaller pieces of raincoat. Each element was tested in secret, checking airtight seams, inflating sections, and making sure the preservers would keep a man afloat. What began as desperate improvisation hardened into discipline. For half a year, the nightly sequence of cutting, gluing, pressing, and sealing became less an act of escape and more a ritual of faith. Faith that the patchwork raft, their paddles, and their vests would hold against the icy waters and unforgiving currents beyond Alcatraz. One night, while exploring the hidden space above the cell block, Morris, the Anglin brothers, and West stumbled on the last obstacle to freedom, the ventilator cover in the ceiling, fastened by bolts. Realizing it would block their escape, they spent the following months quietly removing some bolts and replacing them with painted soap replicas to deceive inspections, while fashioning a crude wrench from scrap to deal with the rest when the time finally came. By doing this, they had solved every problem inside the prison walls, carving holes behind the sinks, building the hidden workshop, crafting tools, assembling the raft and vests, even preparing disguises to mislead the nightly inspections. Only one final barrier remained: the roof. By the night of June 11, 1962, the plan was ready to be tested. After the final head count, Morris, John and Clarence Anglin slipped through the holes behind their sinks, crawling into the service corridor that led up to the ceiling space. Alan West, however, struggled with his opening. The concrete around his vent hadn't been cleared enough. Despite frantic attempts, he couldn't break free in time and was left behind. Above the cell block, Morris reached the ventilator cover. The preparation of months paid off. The soap replicas blended perfectly with the real bolts, and the crude wrench quickly loosened the remaining fasteners. Within minutes, the cover came free. Around 10:30 p.m., the three men climbed through and emerged onto the prison roof. They moved carefully across the darkened rooftop, then descended along a vertical kitchen vent pipe to reach the ground. Carrying their folded raft, paddles, and vests, they slipped past the service yard and made their way to the northeastern shoreline of Alcatraz. There, using a concertina instrument converted into a pump, they began inflating the raft. The process took close to 40 minutes, and by around midnight, the rubberized seams held firm. The tide was ebbing northward, flowing out through the Golden Gate. With life vests secured and paddles ready, they pushed the raft into the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay. For a moment, the darkness swallowed them whole. The patched raft drifted into the tide toward the Golden Gate, and the three men were never seen again. The following morning, on June 12, 1962, Alcatraz awoke to silence broken by alarm. Guards discovered the plaster and paint dummy heads lying in the bunks, the real men long gone. The most secure prison in America had been breached. What followed was one of the largest manhunts ever launched in San Francisco. Coast Guard boats scoured the waters, aircraft circled above, and divers searched the rocky shores of Alcatraz, Angel Island, and the mainland, hunting for any trace of the missing convicts or their handmade raft. Traces soon emerged. A paddle was spotted drifting near Angel Island. A torn life vest washed up on a nearby beach. And perhaps most intriguing, a plastic-wrapped wallet appeared, containing photographs, notes, and a receipt, all tied to the Anglin family. Alan West, left behind in his cell, later became a key source for investigators. Interrogated extensively by the FBI, he provided crucial details about the preparation, the digging behind the sinks, the hidden workshop, the raincoat raft, and the tools fashioned from scrap. He even claimed that the entire escape had been his idea, though most accounts credit Frank Morris, or, in some versions, John Anglin, as the true mastermind. But no bodies were ever recovered. After 17 years of investigation, the FBI officially concluded in 1979 that Morris and the Anglin brothers likely drowned in the cold, unforgiving currents of San Francisco Bay. The Bureau closed its case, turning responsibility over to the U.S. Marshals Service, which technically still keeps the fugitives wanted. And yet, the mystery persisted. In 2013, a letter surfaced, allegedly written by John Anglin himself, claiming that the three had survived.
My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. I'm 83 years old and in bad shape. I have cancer. Yes, we made it that night, but barely. If you announce on TV that I will be promised to first go to jail for no more than a year and get medical attention, I will write back to let you know exactly where I am. This is no joke. Frank died in 2008 and Clarence died in 2011. I have lived most of my life in Seattle. I lived in North Dakota for 8 years. I now live in Southern California.
Handwriting analysis proved inconclusive, but rumors only deepened. Over the years, The Anglin family reported receiving postcards, mementos, and even a photograph said to show the brothers in Brazil. None of these leads have ever been definitively proven. One such photograph, allegedly taken in Brazil in 1975, drew particular attention. Decades later, it was examined by facial recognition experts from IdenTV, working with Rothko in Ireland, who used advanced neural networks to compare it against archival images of John and Clarence Anglin. The system produced a match, suggesting strong similarities between the faces in the photo and the known images of the brothers. In the context of a criminal investigation, however, such a result is not considered definitive proof. The image itself was said to have been taken by Fred Brizzi, a childhood friend of the Anglin brothers, who later became a pilot and drug smuggler, a controversial past that made his testimony unreliable in the eyes of investigators. The photo's quality was poor, its provenance tied to Brizzi's contested account, and no supporting physical evidence was ever linked to it. Specialists stressed that while the AI analysis showed resemblances, it could not establish identity beyond doubt. But as far as technology is concerned, the prisoners made it. Later in 2014, researchers at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands revisited the escape, this time through advanced tide and drift simulations of the bay on the night of June 11, 1962. Using historical tide records and hydrodynamic modeling, they tested different departure times and rowing strengths. Their results suggested that if Morris and the Anglin brothers had launched around 11:30 p.m., the ebb tide could have carried them safely north toward the Marin Headlands, precisely where debris such as a paddle and a life vest were found in 1962. But the margin was razor thin. Leaving even an hour later would have shifted the current, dragging them out to sea. The study left one conclusion: survival was possible, but only under the narrowest of conditions. In the days following the escape, investigators also pursued reports of a stolen blue Chevrolet near Marin County, on the mainland just north of the Golden Gate. The timing of the theft, within 24 hours of the breakout, raised suspicions that it might have been the work of Morris and the Anglin brothers after reaching shore. However, no definitive link could ever be established. The car was never tied to them by witnesses, fingerprints, or other forensic evidence, leaving it as yet another tantalizing clue that hinted at survival but fell short of proof. More than 60 years later, the Alcatraz escape endures as legend. With nothing but stolen tools, raincoats, and sheer ingenuity, 3 men defied the rock, eluded the FBI, and carved their names into history. Whether they drowned in the freezing bay or vanished into freedom, one truth is certain: their daring made them unforgettable, and their fate remains one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. But now the question is yours. What do you think? Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers perish in the bay? Or did they outwit the FBI and live out their lives in freedom?